Welcome to Nerdy and Flirty, a podcast designed to help you create a life that you love. It's nerdy with science-backed information, and it's flirty, it's fun, it's quick, it's straight to the point. My name is Cass, and welcome back to the podcast. I hope you're having a great day. Thank you so much for listening. Welcome to statistics class. This episode has so many fun statistics and facts just about the 20s. In this episode, we are dissecting the decade of our 20s. We are dissecting what goes on in the 20s, the transition to adulthood, where you should be by certain milestones. We're going through it all. And trust me when I say this episode is probably going to make you feel a little bit better about where you are in your life, no matter where you are in your life. If you're feeling behind, or you're feeling like you're comparing yourself to someone else, then this episode is definitely for you. I have this conversation with my friends a lot about where we are versus where we thought we would be by this age. And let me just say, the two are very, very different. When I think about where I thought I would be by 23, it is so different than where I'm at right now, but in the most beautiful, amazing way, but it's still very different. If you looked at my Pinterest board or my vision board or any kind of board that I had planned for where I would be right now, it is definitely not where I am right now, but that is the beauty of it. I talk about this with my friends and we all say the same exact thing. None of us are where we thought we would be. And the truth is that the transition into adulthood is so different now than what it was decades and generations ago. If you find yourself comparing where you're at right now to where your parents were at your age, you're not alone in that. I feel like a lot of us do that, and we put pressure on ourselves to achieve certain milestones by a certain age because our parents did. Like when our parents had kids, when our parents got married, when our parents moved out and all that kind of stuff. But I'm here to tell you that the reality is our generations have changed. And I'm not saying one generation is better or worse than the other, but they are definitely different. I want this episode to be something that makes you feel a little bit better about where you're at in life, because the reality is that life is just different now than it was 40 years ago, and that is perfectly okay. I know when I compare my life right now to my mom's life when she was my age, we are at completely different phases of life. My mom bought her first house at 21. She was married by 23. She had 2 kids before 30, had a second home by 32. My mom has reached every single milestone you're supposed to reach in the adult transition, and there's actually 5 milestones determined by psychologists that consider you an adult. We're gonna go through them in a minute. But first, let me just say, my mom worked so hard to get where she is, and she really hustled and bustled, and she grew up much different than I grew up. And there are a ton of different reasons why someone might reach certain milestones sooner or at a different pace than someone else. Not to mention just how much society has shifted from then to now. And that's actually what inspired this episode, because psychologists are talking about it. People nowadays are reaching adulthood at a different pace than people before. And there are so many different factors and reasons why. And I wanted to create this kind of discussion about it because I found it very interesting. And I think it affects a lot of the people listening to the podcast. I feel like a lot of us do a good job at not comparing to our friends anymore. I feel like a lot of us talk openly about celebrating our friends and celebrating our friends' achievements. I know in my friend groups, we all are doing so many different things and we live such different lives than each other, but we're all very happy for each other because we all know that we're all achieving what we actually want to achieve. Even though some of us are in graduate school, some of us are working full time, some of us are trying to buy houses, like we're all in different spots, but we're all very proud of each other. But when it comes to comparing ourselves to previous generations, especially our own parents, that's where it can get kind of tricky because most of our parents did achieve certain milestones at the ages that we are now or at the ages that we're approaching. And I think that's why there's so much pressure to achieve these milestones by a certain timeline. So what are these milestones that I keep talking about? There are 5 milestones that psychologists say are the transition into adulthood. And these 5 milestones kind of categorize you into being a quote-unquote adult. Once you achieve all 5 of these milestones, that's when you finish your transition into adulthood. And what researchers are finding is that transition into adulthood is happening at a delayed rate. It's happening later and later and later, if it's even happening at all. The 5 milestones in order are completing school, leaving home, becoming financially independent, getting married, and having a child. I would say many of us still view these milestones as milestones into adulthood, whether you've thought of it that way or not. A lot of us have this pressure to think like, okay, I need to leave home, get married, have kids, become rich, and do all these different things. And a lot of us say we need to do it by the age of 30, which is interesting because in 1960, 77% of women and 65% of men achieved all 5 of these milestones by the age of 30. And let's just use my own mom as a case study. Sorry, Mom, I'm putting you on blast. But she achieved all 5 of these milestones before the age of 30. She actually achieved them by 26, and she wasn't even around in 1960. So I think I can confidently say that a lot of our parents achieved these milestones before the age of 30 or around the age of 30, where nowadays, a lot of people in our generation don't even want to achieve all of these milestones, or they don't want to achieve these milestones in that set order. Now, a lot of people are hitting these milestones so much later in their lifetime, and some people never even achieve all 5 of these milestones, and that doesn't make them better or less than, it just is something to point out. Many people do not even want to get married anymore, whether it's from lack of commitment or just no desire to be quote unquote tied down or settled down. I was reading a little article about women, and a lot of women say that women benefit less from marriage than men, which take that as you want. But a lot of women are starting to say they don't even want to get married, just like women are saying that they don't want to have kids. Less and less people are having children, whether it's by choice or not by choice. Many people are opting to be child-free, but also many people are struggling to have children and therefore don't achieve these milestones that transition them into adulthood. And then also the entire order of these 5 milestones has been completely rearranged in these current generations and in current society. It's a lot more socially acceptable to have children without ever getting married or have a child and get married later. There's not as much pressure to have both marriage and children. You can have either one separately and be totally okay, which I think is awesome. Same with going back to school. Many people are going to school later or going back to school later after they already did the marriage and all that kind of stuff. Going to school isn't a prerequisite for all the other things anymore. Part of that is just the freedom and independence that we have nowadays to do more things. We can go back to school easier. We can have career changes easier. And obviously, I'm just 23 and I wasn't living in those past generations. But from what I've heard and from the conversations I have, we are a lot more independent nowadays than we ever were in terms of not needing to be married to be successful, not needing to be married to raise a family and do all of these things. Of course, there are struggles with anything, but there is so much more opportunity to do things in an unconventional way nowadays versus back in previous generations. In fact, I would even argue that it's more socially acceptable to be unconventional. Additionally, I can say that 20-something-year-olds now are more mobile and move around a lot more than previous generations. 1/3 of people in their 20s move every single year. And that doesn't mean moving states and moving cities, but it does mean moving residencies. So if you feel like you've been moving around a lot, you're not really sure where your roots are or where you want to settle down, you are totally not by yourself in that. 1/3 of 20-something-year-olds move every single year. And part of that is because leases are usually year long and a lot of us are renting and not buying, which is a whole nother conversation that I just will not get into in this episode. I'm sorry. But also I think we're more comfortable moving around and trying different things versus staying in one place. I think nowadays a lot of us are more comfortable moving to a new city and trying different places, even if we don't know a bunch of people and don't know the area as well. We are more comfortable doing that. And I think we also just have more flexibility to do that. We have social media and we have the internet and we have a lot more resources to make that a lot more feasible. Now you can move somewhere without ever actually going there and you'll know what the vibes are like, what the nightlife is like, where to go and all of that kind of stuff. But also if you're like, Cass, I haven't moved a lot. I've been living at home. I don't really have all these beautiful luxuries that you keep talking about. Absolutely don't worry because I have statistics about that too. Many people move back home. In fact, I found a New York Times article, and this was written in 2010, so I would suspect that the numbers are much higher nowadays in this economy. Back in 2010, which is almost 15 years ago, 40% of people in their 20s moved back home at least once, and that was in 2010. So imagine it now. I know pretty much every single one of my friends moved back home at least for a little bit of time before they moved somewhere else. And I still know a ton of my friends that still live at home, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I actually think it's one of the most financially smart things you could do if you have the opportunity and the luxury to live back home with your family for a little bit. You can save so much money living back home. Plus, it's a nice time to live back with your family, even though there's stressors and it's not always butterflies and rainbows when you move back home as an adult. It's such a nice time to reconnect and spend time with your family, because truly, when's the next time you're gonna have that opportunity? Once you start living in your own home with your own family, maybe your own kids, maybe your own husband and everything like that, you're not gonna be spending time with your parents as much. That's a really bittersweet thing, because of course you wanna move on and you wanna have a family of your own and you wanna do all of these different things, but we don't usually realize that the last time we lived at home was the last time. You know, you don't usually think about that. Usually you're so excited to move on and move forward, and then you think about it and you're like, wow, that was the last time that I woke up and ate breakfast with my mom, or that was the last time that I had a sleepover with my little brother, or whatever it is. You know, so don't beat yourself up on that. Try to romanticize it and enjoy it as much as you can, because you're not gonna have those moments forever. Another topic in the whole 20-something-year-old decade that I wanted to get into is the topic of career change. Now, this is a personal curiosity for me, because I feel like even though I'm still in my early-ish 20s, I've had multiple different careers or jobs that I've tried out, and they've been different from each other. I've gotten experience in many different things, and I wanted to feel like less alone in that, honestly, because I started to think, is this normal? Or do most people get a job out of college and stick with it for many years? And what I found was very reassuring to see. If you're someone that has changed jobs or you want to change jobs, this part is definitely for you. Don't feel bad about it. So, people in their 20s go through an average of 7 jobs throughout the decade of their 20s. Seven. That is almost one job every single year, changing jobs. Now, I think this is for a wide variety of reasons, and I talked about this in my post-grad episode, but first of all, finding a job post-grad is just hard. Like, it really is hard finding a job, especially trying to find a job in your direct field of interest. So a lot of us start out not even working jobs that we necessarily wanted or were interested in. So of course it makes sense that if you got a job just to get a job, it makes sense that at some point, once you have more experience, you'll want to transition into a job that you're more interested in. I also think nowadays there's been a shift in societal pressure to have a job and just stick it out because of the benefits and the retirement and things like that. Of course, those things are really important, but I feel like a lot of us value different things now versus in the past. Many of us value overall job satisfaction and overall happiness over the retirement plan and the benefit plan. Of course, those things matter, and of course, those things are something that you should care about when it comes to choosing a job and applying for jobs. But also, we care a lot about our job satisfaction. Nowadays, I feel like so many people are leaving their jobs that they've been at for however many years because they realized that they had terrible work-life balance, or it stressed them out, or it made them truly unhappy. And even though it paid them well, they found more satisfaction in another job somewhere else. People aged 21 to 25 are 5.7 times more likely to change careers during that time than any other time in their lives. So if you're in a job that you're like, I don't really love this, I don't want to stay here forever, don't feel like you have to stick it out. Of course, think it out and be rational, and don't just impulsively quit your job just because you're listening to this podcast. But if you feel weird about it or you feel bad about it, I know I did, just understand that it's very normal, and this is exactly the time to do those things. I mean, definitely don't screw anyone over and don't just up and leave, but really weigh your options and understand that if you're age 21 to 25, it's very normal to change jobs. And just if you're feeling weird about that too, talk to someone older than you and ask them how many different jobs they had in their 20s, and they will probably tell you at least a few. This is exactly the time to try out different things, and that's the beauty of this time in our lives. Even though there's a ton of uncertainty and there's a ton of things that aren't necessarily going the way we thought they would, this is also the time to experiment and try different things and chase your passions and chase after your interests. Now, maybe you're listening to this and you're like, Cass, these career stats are so interesting, but I can't even get a job. So I don't want to hear what you have to say. Well, don't worry. I have statistics for you too. 25% of recent grads, so that same 21 to 25-year-old age group, are unemployed, okay? Another 25% are underemployed. That means half of recent graduates, people that went to college, got a degree, chased after something, either don't have a job or have a job that doesn't use their qualifications, which is crazy, but that is the world that we're living in right now. And it's very normal to kind of work your way up the ladder. Unfortunately, having a degree does not just guarantee that you're going to get a job in that field. A lot of times it's so many other things that also play a part, whether it's networking, just timing, location. There's so many reasons why you may or may not get a job. But just understand that 50% of recent grads either have a job that they are not using their qualifications for, or they don't even have a job altogether. Out of the people that do have jobs post-grad, 21% use their education, which is great. We want to use that. We paid a lot of money for it. But 53% use half or less than half of their education for the job that they're in, which I actually fall into this category. I have a degree that is what allowed me to have my job now, but my degree is not in the same field as my job. So even though my job requires a degree, I don't have the degree to match the job that I have. So I'm using like half my education basically. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I literally love my job and I fell right into it. Just because I'm sharing these stats with you does not mean that you should just sit on the couch and do nothing. Be proactive when it comes to networking and putting yourself out there. You can create that dream job for yourself. It just takes time, working your way up the ladder, networking, meeting the right people, putting yourself in the right rooms. And then 15% of employed people post-grad use none of their education, which means they have this degree that they don't even use. And I know quite a few people like this actually, where they got jobs that are not based on what they studied in college at all, and it didn't even matter. And honestly, they're some of the most happy people that I know. So don't put yourself into a box. There's tons of opportunities and the job world is just different now. I really like these statistics and I liked researching this because it showed to me that where you're at career-wise depends on so many factors, some within your control, some not in your control. And the 20s are the time to really try things out, and you're gonna have jobs that you don't necessarily love or feel totally aligned with, and that's totally normal and totally okay. You are definitely not alone when it comes to working a job that isn't in your career field, isn't in your field of interest, doesn't use your degree, but that's just kind of how it works sometimes. Sometimes you have to be at the bottom of the ladder to work your way up. And what's refreshing to hear and refreshing to see is that you're not stuck in any place. Even if you're not in your 20s, many people are having career changes. I know someone very, 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 very close to me, and he's in his 50s, and he just had a career change in his 50s, and he is the happiest he's ever been in his entire career. Changing his job in his 50s literally changed his entire life, both at work and outside of work. So it's not too late. And if you're not in your 20s and you've been thinking about this and you have a plan, and it's something you've been thinking of, like, don't feel like you're stuck just because you're not in your 20s and you're not changing jobs the same way a 20-something-year-old would. Obviously, weigh the pros and cons and be very responsible and logical about changes that you make in your life. But if you keep having this gut feeling that you're super unhappy and you know that work is the reason why, really weigh your options and see if you have other options out there, because I know some people that did it later in life and they are so much happier, and it was one of the best decisions they ever made. So anyway, the last little topic that I want to talk about when it comes to the 20s is the thought of even being in school. So I talked a lot about post-grad, I talked a lot about college, but the reality is that a lot of people aren't even going to college in the same traditional way from 18 to 22 like we used to. In fact, 39% of college students are over the age of 25, which is like the unconventional, non-traditional college student. There are lots of different reasons why people are in college later, One of them being that people are just delaying going to college. Taking gap years has become a lot more normal and socially acceptable. If you're traveling, if you're doing a volunteer opportunity, internship, things like that, or even just taking a gap year to get experience and see where you want to work. I think a lot of people are realizing that it's important to figure out what you want to do, and sometimes you don't know exactly what you want to do at 18 years old, so why rush into college if you don't exactly know what you want to do? Also, a reason people are older in college now is because people are going back to school. A lot of people realize that once they get their degree, they go into the workforce and they realize they need another degree, or they need a degree in something different to really work in the field of interest that they have, and that is completely normal. Also, a lot of jobs pay for college courses. There are opportunities to go back to school for a cheaper or reduced rate. And many people are just viewing different careers, like I've been saying. Sometimes that does require going back to school and getting a degree in something else, or finishing a degree, things like that. And 58% of those college students that are over the age of 25 are working full-time while they're in college, and 26% of those are raising families. So it's not necessarily always just people that are living their 20s, living their best life, and then they decide, oh, I'll just go back to school and take classes. A lot of these people are working and hustling and trying to figure out what they want to do. And then the third reason why I can speculate why people would be in college at an older age is simply because it just takes longer. A lot of people are in school longer nowadays for grad school, med school. So many other programs now require a master's degree or a graduate level degree to get a certain job. So many of us are just in school a lot longer than before. I know my dad, for example, when he was 18, he got into his field and worked his way up, and now he is where he is. But if he wanted to just jump into the job he has now, nowadays he would probably need a college degree. I don't know exactly, but I do know that job requirements now have changed compared to in the past. Now a job that requires a college education might not have required that in the past, and that is something that nowadays we have to navigate and either go back to school or go to school longer or things like that. All this is to say that people say that the 20s are supposed to be the best years of your life, and something that I really wanted to look into was the whole life satisfaction and which decade people feel the most satisfied in, because everyone says that the 20s are the best, and I just have to disagree. Even though I'm in the 20s and I love the 20s, I think it's so small-minded to think that this is the best time ever and it just gets worse from here. I don't like that attitude. I don't like that negative thought. So I wanted to see if I could find any statistics or polls to kind of back up my thought process, and I did. So despite all these challenges and all these difficult things that happen in the 20s, I found a poll that polled people from all different decades, people that are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, etc., to see what decade was the best decade of their lives. And the results are kind of shocking. When you look at the data, it's actually the majority of people say that the best decade of their lives is whatever decade they're in that present moment. So if you ask a 20-something-year-old what's the best decade of their life, they're gonna say their 20s. If you ask a 30-something-year-old, they're gonna say their 30s. If you ask a 40-something-year-old, they say their 40s. And obviously this is just averages, but the majority of people in each decade said that that decade was the best decade in their lives. And that is really exciting to look forward to, because I know I hear it, people tell me, oh, the 20s are the best. But when you really ask people and you really get down to the nitty gritty, most people say that the best decade is the one that they're living right now. And I think that that's really inspiring and something that we should all kind of hold on to and think about. That kind of just wraps it up and says that life does get better. Each decade it gets better and better and better and better. That's something really positive to look forward to. And even despite all the challenges and all the things that happen in the 20s, from moving back home to not getting the job you want, to not getting married at a certain time, not having kids at a certain time, despite all of that, your 20s can still be really satisfying and full of a lot of love and a lot of life. There's so many other things to be doing besides those 5 milestones that we talked about. So even though the 5 milestones to adulthood are things like financial independence and moving out and having kids and getting married, there are so many other milestones that we should want to achieve in our lives. Things like building a health routine that's actually sustainable and makes me feel my best, traveling the world, having a job that gives me satisfaction, making really good friends, doing things that I genuinely want to do. All of those things are just as important, if not even more important, milestones in your life to achieve. I think that the articles that I read were missing a few things because those things matter just as much as those milestones, if not even more than those milestones, depending on who you ask. So when it comes to feeling like you're not an adult, or you're not progressing quickly enough, or you're not hitting certain milestones at a certain time, figure out your own milestones. What do you want to achieve before a certain age? And it doesn't have to be the milestones that everyone else says that we need to achieve. Make them your own milestones. Do you want to travel to every state in the United States? Do you want to go out of the country for the first time? Do you want to make some new friends? Do you want to learn a language, start a new hobby? There are so many things that we could be excited about and set goals for and do before the age of 30 that are unrelated to your marriage status and your childbearing years. I really hope that you liked this episode. I know it was kind of all over the place and I had a lot of different things that I wanted to share, but I also think it was kind of interesting. So let me know if you like this style of episode. Let me know if this is something that you could get behind, because I thought it was fun to talk this out. Thank you so much for listening. As always, follow the Instagram if you don't already at Nerdy and Flirty Pod, and me at Cass Camp. Rate it 5 stars and nothing less, and make sure you're following the show if you're not following it on either Apple or Spotify, so that you can see every single week when we have episodes. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great week. Remember that you're not behind. You're not on anyone else's timeline but your own. I hope you have a great day. Bye.